feel like everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
100%. Why is this important? Why are we even going here? He's helped a lot of guys. He's also not had success with a lot of guys.
Come in with a purpose, and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it.
From the majors to the sandlot, baseball and softball share space in one place. Welcome to the farm system.
Fellas, and the ladies, welcome back to another episode of The Farm. You know we back in action. We got Tank on the scene. We got everything moving today. Tanky, wave to the people. Tell them what's up. All right. If you don't watch the video version of our podcast, you're missing out. It's on you. You're missing a whole episode of Tank just giving you the stare down. I told Cody I was going to do it.
Yeah.
Listen, I got to call him out on the podcast. Cody has the greatest listen. You guys might not even know because Cody's like low key humble, be hiding in the back rooms. Look, like Cody asked some of the greatest questions, and we'll get us in all of these like deep conversations, but it's never on the podcast. So I was giving him a hard time before we got on. I'm like, bro, why are you gatekeeping the people? All these great combos we have all these great combos, and it's not on the podcast. And I'll be sitting in the office like, man, that should be on the podcast. Man, that could be a podcast. Man, that could be such a nasty podcast. And then then we started talking about, me and Jarrell started talking about the other day that we're gonna start putting like cameras. We can do it so easily now. We put cameras in all the offices and with audio, so that way we could just pull it and do things from there. Because we have some nasty combos that randomly just come up. We've even talked about too. Give us feedback on this. You know what I'm saying? Send your boy a DM. Send your boys a DM. You know, send Tanky a DM. Shout out to Tanky at what is it? Frenchie.
I think it's the Frenchie Show.
The Frenchie Show. Yeah.
Blow that up.
Shout out to my boy Tanky. Make sure to follow my boy. But also too, we're just talking about that like DMs wise, is questions that these people, ask or X, Y, and Z, and then we'll end up talking about them, or it like sends us in a different way. Maybe somebody posted on this or whatever, and we end up having these really great combos. And a lot of times we don't have them recorded, right? And I'm like, man, that would be so good to share with that as well. So one came up the other day that we talked about, and we started getting into some coaching philosophy, which is nasty and also unique and ever changing. So
So recently we've come out with our own heavy balls, but we made a decision. One of the decisions was we came out with a really heavy one. I believe it's 1.5 pounds or 24 ounces, right?
Yeah.
It's a really heavy one, and what we've kind of noticed is obviously like our hitters here hit them, but there's some pushback on hitting some of the heavier ones, right? And two, you just, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if there is one that heavy for hitting.
For hitting specifically, yeah. So there's obviously the 2 pound one for like reverse throws for like, or even, sometimes in programming for throwing. Also too, obviously we've hit med balls that are, again, 4 pounds or whatever, right? Like we've gone crazy. That's why we don't even think
most people don't hit med balls.
And also too, it's a very unique thing. We have a 4 pound Kevlar wrapped med ball that we can strike with a bat and it won't break, right? So because of that, it's a very different scenario, but we've been doing that for a while. So again, like 1.5 pounds isn't wild, and even to the 4 pound, it's not like we do it like for 1 million reps. A lot of times we're just trying to get some of this bracing or some of the stability that we're going to talk about here in a minute. That is big. So yes, but it is, to my knowledge, right? We were always, because again, for me, I was always looking for these heavier balls, right? So the other area, what people would do is they would go and get those like mini basketballs, like little kid basketballs, and then people would hit those too as well, which are generally kind of around the same thing. Plus, it's also, but the issue is, and I would say this actually, if there is heavier balls out there, what they usually are is they're also bigger, and I didn't want that.
Yeah, it's the same size as baseball.
I didn't want a big ball that was heavier. I wanted a ball that was the size of a baseball that was that heavy, which was very unique in the space. Even to the point that as we were manufacturing it, and as we were making them, it's like, hey, like we got to really test these out because there's a quality control issue where it's like, what if these things start breaking? What if these other things are right? So we had to test them in house for, a good while there to make sure that, again, they weren't just going to obliterate and, open up just because of the weight or, and also too, were they going to fly different through the air?
Right.
Was the hair going to, because the whole point, and if you haven't if you didn't know about our heavy balls that we came out with to this point, first off, why are you living under a rock? Second thing is for baseball, we have 3 different weights that are all the same color.
Mm-hmm.
So the hitter, what we saw is, again, that the hitter was cheating depending on what weight they knew was coming. One thing to talk about, I think, before we get into it too, is why it was even like that in the first place. And the reason it was like that in the first place had nothing to do with hitters, had everything to do with pitchers. So when they were programming for pitchers, remember, like weighted balls was in pitching way before it was in hitting, right? And weighted balls and pitching, your programming is like, hey, 5 of these, 6 of those, or whatever, right? And then you have a lot of pitchers that are going through their stuff. So it just made it really easy for them to go, oh, yeah, the light blue one is this weight. The black ball is this weight. And also, too, the other thing is most of the times you're buying these balls from overseas, and they don't use the same measuring scale, I guess that's what it's called. I don't know. I forgot what's the technical name for.
I mean, I think it's the metric system.
Metrics,
right?
yeah. Just about what
kilograms and grams and
and so because we don't really use that obviously over here in the States very much, it's people are like, what one? Like which one should I go? It's not like pound and a half or
right.
X, Y, and Z, right? So because of that, and we're ordering from overseas, it's just easier to be like 3 with the yellow ball, 4 with the light blue ball, X, Y, and Z. But for hitters, because everything's coupled with like perception and action, right? Like the perception of the ball coming in, and then also, prior knowledge, right? If you see, because we used to try to trick them, right? We even got, we had heavy balls that we were wrapping with tape, and we were trying to do things so that they visually couldn't tell until really late that it was a heavier ball or whatever. And so we just came up with the idea, just like, hey, like, typically, no one even really makes a 5-ounce plyo ball like that, other than for pitching. For hitting, I don't know I haven't seen one. I've seen one slightly heavier, like 6 ounces or 6.5 or whatever, right? But like to have a baseball sized that is also 5 ounces, that is literally purely for contact quality and like teaching them to just hit it square and mixed in with our other set, right? So what we started seeing was when hitters would you toss a certain ball, they would swing a certain way, right? And the heavier the ball is, the more leverage they would create, the more bracing they would create, stability they would have, and also all of these things of like they're actually striking the ball almost like if it was a heavy bag, like we used to use tires, things like that back in the day. But the only thing is it's dynamic, it's flying through the air, right? And then now if we can mix that in like we're doing, right, which is like common knowledge to us now, but at the time it is pretty groundbreaking, pushing the game forward in that way, where it's like, hey, yeah, we do have a normal, which is a very custom for people to have like 16 ounce with like a pound, right? Or slightly below a pound, like 15 ounces, 16 ounces, 17 ounces, maybe somewhere in there. But we went way heavier there. And the big effects, and the reason we did that primarily was we were seeing that the most with our pro hitters. Our pro hitters or our Power 5, some of our elite Power 5 players.
Really strong athletes.
Yeah, they were just so athletic and they created so much speed and so much power that even with a pound ball, that they could cheat, not have the greatest moves and still get away with it, right? And that's the game of baseball, right? That if like you're stronger, more athletic, you're X, Y, and Z, like you can get away with things that other guys can't get away with. But then we're like, okay, well, we want to hit even heavier balls, right? So then we started testing out some prototype balls, all these other things of just like, let's try heavier. And then also, is there a too heavy, right? Where it's too much and like, okay, that's overkill. And like now we're getting detrimental effects the opposite way. And then we basically found that like a pound and a half. Pound and a half is like perfect. 2 pounds was too heavy. We even hit it, the 2 pound quite a bit. We obviously have hit the 4 pound med ball. And again, the med ball, it's great. Like that's almost like hitting a heavy bag. But now, in a lot of facilities I had, we didn't have a heavy bag setup. Like our setup is pretty cool, right? Where it's like we can strike it full out. It's not on the ground. We also set it at an angle. We do a lot of things to make it more realistic for what we're trying to create, and not create a lot of these detrimental effects with just these little subtleties that we change. And then we basically figured out again along with it, like the pound and a half was heavy, where like they typically only hit it like maybe halfway through the cage. Like it's pretty, like with that. And then, but the ones we had were also the size of like a softball, or maybe even slightly bigger than a softball. And so when we were like, okay, well, what if we got this down into a baseball size one, right? Which then the contact quality is like, even harder in some ways, I guess you could say. And I think that was, groundbreaking for, a lot of our pro guys, and we saw some breakthroughs there. And this is, over a year ago now, right? We're about to enter the pro off season again.
Yeah.
When we did that and we started seeing these effects and what it was doing to hitters, all these things, these other, then we arrived at what we are at today. But anyways, that's the backstory, kind of just around the heavy balls, just like setting that up. And then why don't you kind of intro, like kind of what.
So there's like a little bit of pushback, I would say, and not necessarily of people like, oh, that's really bad for you or whatever, but just like some hesitancy, right?
It's new. Like, anything new, people are going to ask questions and go, 100%. Well, why is it the heaviest ball? Why has no one ever thought of this before? What is what could be the is this good? Is this bad? And also too, then you also got competitors in the space that are also selling their own heavy balls or whatever, and they're going to have their own pushback being like, well, this is why ours are better, right? Which is like, bro, I say all the time, I don't care whose heavy balls you buy, right? Yeah. Like, great, if you buy ours, I'm juiced. Yeah. But at the same time, right, they work, right? And we just found another thing that worked, and I'm sure somebody else will come out with just as heavy balls, and I'm sure here within a couple months, somebody will come out with all the same colors like we are, because everybody loves, that's been exploding of people liking that idea. So again, like, great, but anyways, go ahead.
Yeah. And so with some of that pushback, but that also started to create some conversations that we had where, one, I believe there's a question sent to you or a topic that you saw where they're actually talking about like why steroids are banned because because they can create more speed, and that's why bat speed's so important.
Yeah,
and then
that was good.
Yeah, and then we got into the topic, and this is again kind of like an overview of like our conversation, and we'll dive into the details. But then I started talking about, it's like the first time I got exposed to plyo balls or heavy balls or just different weighted balls were when I was training with Driveline back in college a while back, and looking back at it, how I evaluate the situation was when we'd hit the heavier balls, what I think they were seeing without being able to go back and ask that particular question to that particular coach that was training me was they would see me slow down my swing to try to hit the ball square.
Yeah.
And then they would try to combat it with the light balls and the underload bat. Be like, no, we don't want you to slow down your swing. We want you to swing fast.
Maintain your swing the whole time.
So then we would swing light bat, light balls to try to focus on contact quality and moving fast. And
and can we be working on both at the same time? And then you get into the whole things of being like, Tewksbury talked about this on their podcast just the other day too, where because you commonly see this, by the way, this is true throughout all levels of baseball. The faster the ball is moving, typically the hitter on average swings the bat slower, right? And what I mean by that, or again, if that is like, what? Why would it be that way? This is kind of seen through data all the way around, like in training environments, let's say in like front toss or off the tee. Typically, you'll see these higher bat speeds. One, because the ball's not moving, right? Or it's moving at a slower rate of speed, and I can do a bigger, longer move that creates, more speed, X, Y, and Z. I don't have to be adjustable. The ball's not going to all of a sudden break and have this massive drop or whatever. And then so typically, Driveline, even in their own studies or even when their own data that they put out, they say that this is the case, which is why we're trying to get training speeds in a game environment, right? Which is like, Tewksbury talked about that yesterday about like, in a game, you can't always have your A swing. And also too, sometimes you have to go away from your A swing to make better contact, right? So it's like, again, and he gave the example, maybe we'll plug him in the notes, but he gave the example like a slider down and away. If you were to ask, and this is, I think if I could add on to what he was saying, is basically you could say this. If you ask somebody, hey, I want you to hit this ball as far as you can, as hard as you can, and as square as possible. You can pick any pitch in any location that you want. I don't know a single hitter that's going to go, I want to slider down and away.
For sure.
Right? Or for softball, I want to curve down and away.
Yeah.
No one is asking for that pitch, right? It's a very difficult pitch to hit, and you're typically not going to get off your very best swing, right? You're most likely not going to PR on that pitch.
Right.
That's not the one I want to PR on, or I'm going to try to PR on, right? PR, personal record, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's typically not the ball that I'm going to do with. And Tewksbury was saying that is like, hey, to square that ball up, it might not be your A swing, right, with your max speeds, with perfect contact. Like, like most people are going to say, I want it right down the middle, right? That's typically my best ball I'm going to hit for every hitter across the board. Maybe you hit ball slightly lower, slightly higher, but generally
that location
that of the plate, right? Like, so again, along with that, he was making the point that there's, times and places, especially too when you don't know what is coming, when you don't know what is coming, where guys will take away speed so that they can square balls up, right? Obviously, in a lot of ways, in my opinion, that is very different from the philosophy of what Driveline teaches. That is very different from the philosophy that a lot of the coaches either have preached or what they have sold or what they have marketed. I don't think that I don't think it's fair to say that they don't care about contact quality. I don't think that would be accurate.
Right.
I also don't think that it's fair to say that they wouldn't be okay if a guy hit a home run with lesser bat speed. I don't think that's necessarily not accurate. But I also think that there obviously is I think it's the opposite of what people think too. I think a lot of people think, I know we're going in some different directions here, but I think this is the other thing. I just want to throw this out for like how to view the market. People are selling products that they believe in, right? They're not, in my experience from being in the space, people are not selling things because they sell necessarily. Yes, that's part of it, but they come up with a product because they believe it's really going to help athletes. They have good intentions, X, Y, and Z. Sometimes people are just wrong, right? And I'm not saying that like Driveline is crucially wrong and they're terrible and all these other things, right? They believe in what they have. They have their data. They have their things. They have this, right? And they come and they say this and say, hey, we come to this conclusion backing why we coach what we coach. We do the same thing, right? I can show you plenty of data that backs what we preach and why. They probably do a better job at marketing that data, right? Because it's more advantageous for them to do so, to sell what they sell, to build the company how they want to build the company, all those other things, right? But again, everybody is doing that and selling things that they think would actually work. I didn't come out with farm boards because I thought that the whole market was going to love them off the jump and that they were going to sell so well. They sell better now, right? But it took years to get there, right? Where most of the market was actually the opposite direction. They were like, what are these? You might as well hit on skates and blah, 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 and all these other things, right? How is that going to teach you to do any of those things? It's actually the opposite. If you want to come out, if you know anything about business, you want to come out with something that people already understand. I don't know, like heavy balls or, water bags, some of the things that people already like have a general idea of why they would work or how they would work or X, Y, and Z. And those are going to sell way better than coming up with an original product and trying to do it from there. Anyways, so all context of getting into there and then back to.
No. And then too, just like, then we had some conversations about some hitters here that, as they get back into like going back into school and school ball and they're trying to do what their coaches ask them to do, is like they're valuing getting a job done or some direction, and with that, like to resonate, they're slowing their swing down, they're losing power at contact and the force transmission because they're so focused on doing a job that they're like just throwing their hands, or to kind of resonate with people that are just like listening, or some coaches that don't know all the scientific terms, and with that though and then too, so we're seeing some of that with like some of the hitters, and then I was talking with one of them, is like we put the blast on, showed him, hey, we're going to hit the heavy balls, we're going to hit some baseballs, look at your speeds, let's pay attention to it. And we go back and we look, and we're seeing like all of his PRs that he hit were 5-ish mile an hour lower bat speeds than what his max was, right? But he's hitting these balls 90 something mile an hour, but then the balls that he peaks on his bat speed, he's hitting 72. And that goes into what I wanted to elaborate on, is like, what does it mean to cheat in front toss, right? And like, what does it mean to cheat the baseball when we're going heavy, regular ball? And then too, like the professional hitters, is like, they're just so athletic, so strong. They can get, a cue that we'll give them is, hey, hit this ball to the back net, right? The heavy ball. Yeah. Hit this heavy ball to the back net. Well, they can cheat that because they don't need to really have a great move and get on plane and strike it and have great direction, because they're so strong, they can still hit that 16-ounce ball to the back net.
The ball doesn't care. The ball there just has to, the ball doesn't have an opinion of when it's going to the back, right? It doesn't have free will. If you hit the ball hard enough with the right angle, it's going to go to that with the right spin, right? It's going to go and hit that spot, right? It's not picking and choosing. It's just, if there's enough force, right? And so again, along with that, if there's a machine hitting it, if it's a, you ever seen those crazy things with the machines, right? If it's a machine hitting it, or if it's the machine, you know what I'm saying? I know you'd like that little shout out to your boy. Yeah, right? Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you got the speed there with crazy amount of efficiency or you didn't, right? Is there enough force to do what you're trying to do? the most athletic players, the strongest players, again, at a base level, can get away with some of those things of not having the greatest of contact qualities. Again, your Aaron Judges, your Stans, guys like that, right? Like they can miss hit balls and hit home runs. Right? We've always known this. We know this when we do our lineups, right? The 4-hole doesn't need to hit it. Generally, it's usually a bigger guy, right? Like there's a reason why we talked about this before. Usually the top, 10 guys in the league in home runs are usually over 230 pounds. Yeah. There's a reason, right? Like along with it, that goes into it. Now, there's deeper levels to all of that, right? Just because you're big doesn't mean that you hit the ball far. Just because you're big doesn't mean you have high exit velocity. Just because you're big doesn't mean, even if you have high exit velocity, doesn't mean that you hit for power and hit a lot of doubles and homers, because they could all be ground balls. We've unpacked those in other sessions. Other podcasts. But with that, like you're saying, is that kind of leads into like we were talking about, is like with the pro guys there, is like they were making less quality contact, but they're still creating enough force to be able to get the hit the ball to the back.
Yeah, right. And then that conversation with that hitter, and then you kind of had that conversation or that that message about well, steroids are banned because it allows them to create more bat speed. But then we started talking and like unpacking that a little bit, and this was really really interesting.
It's not, and the reason that we stopped there for a second too, right, was like, okay. And when I first read it, how I said it to you is like, when he said that, I was like, man, that's a good point, right? Because I never thought about it from that angle, right? Like, the reason that they ban steroids is because it can create more speed, therefore guys can hit more power, right? And so when I looked at that was his thought process, right? And I'm like, man, that's an interesting thought process. But then when I brought it up to you, and I was like, but then one thing I ask myself sometimes, because usually what leads people astray is sometimes they get to like argument F, but the first argument is inaccurate, right? So, for example, we went back to that and we go, okay, well, they took steroids, so they have a higher bat speed. That's my direct correlation. If I take steroids, I swing the bat faster, and that's why they're banned, right? Rather than thinking like, okay, hold on. There's a lot of dudes that do steroids that are not fast. First off, and there isn't one steroid, right? There is
multiple types.
There is a plethora of things, and also too, there's also more sophisticated things than steroids that it's a whole nother planet, right? Cheaters are gonna find ways to cheat, right? Including I did also shout out to one of our podcast series. If you don't remember, I did steroids myself in junior college and still suck. We did a whole series on it.
That was like 2 or 3 parts.
Yeah. We did a whole series on obviously they didn't help my bat speed too much, so we're gonna get there, right? But I think on the same side of that, right, is understanding that, again, it still matters how you train, one. Second, on top of that, too, that from a physiology standpoint, it isn't just like I take the steroids and then all of a sudden I'm fast as hell, right? And there is some steroids that are more prone to power or, producing all those things from a physiology standpoint. So, yes, I agree in some parts there. But I think the other thing is we started talking about, is that original argument accurate, right? And we started unpacking, why, what are those benefits, right? And is that accurate to say that, A equals B, right? And a lot of times that's where arguments start to fall apart, because we make this assumption that like it sounds correct, and then we just move on, and we're like, oh yeah, that must be right, and then we just stay in that thought pattern over and over and over again, when in reality, like there's some holes in it,
and then the two things that come up in my mind is like, well, if that were the case, like, these pro guys, one, why do the heavy balls help them so much? It's like, well, they're not creating faster bat speeds when they're hitting the even heavier ball, right? They need to learn how to redirect.
Yeah, we can measure that, no problem.
Yeah, when we do, like a
lot of guys actually slow down.
Yeah, they have to learn how to redirect that energy that they're creating into the ball to get that heavier ball to go where and how they want it to go, right?
Yep.
And then that goes back to like that visual that you tend to give. It's like, I throw this ball into a brick wall, it's gonna bounce back. Yeah. I throw the same ball into a net, it ain't gonna go nowhere. It's gonna hit the net and drop, right? I'm leaking a lot of energy, right? And so it's like the net's moving faster than the brick wall did. That brick wall's stationary, right? And I know it's like a really extreme example, but again, like the transfer of energy going back into that ball, shooting it back, and that's where my brain kind of went with that, is like, well, yeah, like it sure could make them faster, but also too, is that why people took steroids, or was it a way to get stronger so that when they do hit the ball, it still goes? Or stronger so they can just redirect that energy better, right? It's like, a couple different routes you could go with that.
Yeah, and then we also kind of talk about, and this is where the evolution of also my thought on this, because I've changed tweaked some of the thoughts. Like, we know it works, but also too, a lot of times we're wrong about why it works. Even going back to like, you know, a lot of like old school drills and things like that, right? It's like, it worked. We're just wrong about why it worked, right? And so like, for example, like bracing for sure works. Like for example, we did this one time, back in my 108 days. We had the facility where at the facility, we told all the hitters like, hey, I'm going to at contact, act like I'm going to punch you in the stomach, right? Like, what would you do, right? And they all brace their stomach, right? Like trying to protect themselves, right? And we're like, hey, at contact, I want you to feel that, right? And then we did that with the whole facility, and like 70% of the facility like all PR that day, right? They crushed balls. And so it's like, it works, okay, but why is it working, right? And so, you know, immediately, like, and I think that there's thoughts to both sides, and both can be true at the same time. But what we do know for sure, for example, we've done the thing where we pulled rubber bands away from each other, right? Like you hold one side of the rubber band, I hold one side of the rubber band, right? And then if it's pulled tight, I can just barely flick it, and you can feel the energy all the way on your side. You can feel the movement, right? But if it's loose in the middle and it has a bunch of slack, and I could even do like a bigger hit on it, and you might not even really feel very much of it because it gets dissipated. That energy gets spread out, you know, and dissipated. And so, you know, a lot of things within being an athlete, unless you're if you're a human, just typically going around day in and day out, we need more of an absorption. Like, how much force can we absorb and how well can we dissipate energy is what we're trying to do, because our job is trying not to get hurt like a normal, you know, everyday person just walking around, right? If you work at a cubicle every day, it's not about how much force you could create. Right. You're just trying to not, like, you know, trip and fall and break your hip or whatever, right? Or, you know, a car comes and you're like trying to, you know, like jump out of the way or something like that. And like, you know, as you like land backwards, like you're trying to, like, you know, catch yourself from falling or things like that, right? But typically it's not about like how much force you can produce in a small amount of time. That's what's the biggest difference, like rate of force development from, you know, an amateur compared to a pro is like, that is dramatically different. Like, again, when I throw hooks, like I could have the exact same form. I could do everything perfect technique wise, compared to Mayweather, for example, right? But he's trained his tissue physiology, you know, the physiology of it, and also his CNS system to fire in that particular way over years and years and years of patterning, right? Where he could fire that quickly, and also his brain can make all those connections, those rapid sequencing firing patterns that he's creating to make it all happen. And there's so little loss of energy when he transfers. And like, that's like how efficient he is. And then it's like, you know, I'm a little rusty. Like, what does that mean? It's like, it's not that you can't do it, right? It's just like your brain has to like break up those firing patterns, or, you know, like that process of neurons and how all those are firing together in sequence to, like, again, not dissipate all of this energy and be able to do it with this moving ball on task. So we look at, you know, just that in general. And we started talking about like, okay, so for example, the brick wall. Okay, so Alan Nathan, this is the first thing I want to bring this up because this is what he's the first thing that everybody brings up is like Alan Nathan. He had a study a while back ago where he talks about like, who was it? Frazier that threw the bat?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So he had a perfect example. Basically, they did a study where if they did it actually with tennis rackets originally. It's like an old study where would a ball bounce off a tennis racket harder if it was held, right, and stable, or if it was like floating in the air, right, and it was just hit and it could go fly wherever, right? And they figured out that it didn't really matter if you were holding it really tight or if you're holding it in the air. If it hit the center of the racket, that it would bounce off, and the ballistics of that, it would bounce off perfect. Now, that same study that no one actually talked about these parts of it, and this is shout out to Greg Rose because he talked to me about this, is that same study found that if you were just slightly off dead center of the racket, which they're in a very controlled setting, right? They got the racket set in one exact place. They have a cannon on the other side, and they're literally shooting the ball, hitting a direct spot on it, right? And they need to be able to measure that, right, to say if they're all equal. All things have to be equal, right? So in that, if all things being equal, sure. But if you're slightly off center, the grip mattered dramatically. Like it was, you know, it had a massive impact on what was going on. So you could get into all of that and like arguing like, does grip strength matter or whatever? Because like, for example, like on the Frazier home run, he like threw, like let go of the bat, it hit the ball, and then he hit a home run. And then we had the conversation of, okay, that doesn't necessarily, again, someone would assume like, well, that's that. Wrap it up. That means that that's true, right? When in reality, it's just being like, no. Like, let's look at the physics at play here. Again, remember, the ball does not care. The ball doesn't care how the force is produced. It doesn't matter if it was the guy ran, crow hopped, and swung. It doesn't matter if the guy leg kicked to his ear. It doesn't matter if the guy is 100 pounds or if he's 500 pounds, right? Like, whatever. If the force is in the barrel and it hits the ball with that collision efficiency or whatever, right, and that much force gets into the ball is going to respond based on the force that was acted upon it. It doesn't matter. Now, that doesn't mean that grip strength doesn't matter. And also, too, that statement by itself is ridiculous. Like, it doesn't matter for what? It doesn't matter at contact? Okay, well, that's a different statement than saying it doesn't matter. So, yeah, so that clickbait statement, that one-liner, grip strength doesn't matter. It's like, when? So you're saying I could cut all the muscles off of my arm, and then like I obviously have to hold the bat. There's also centrifugal force. Like when I go to turn, the barrel wants to fly away from me. Like grip strength obviously is really important for me to be able to hold onto the bat. And also too, if grip strength doesn't matter and grip doesn't matter and all these other things, why do we even use pine tar? Like what's the point? Like because I have to hold onto the bat. It's really hard to hold onto the bat, right? It's flying at a high rate of speed in our hands. Like again, obviously to some extent it matters quite a bit, right? We're not going to just. There's a reason that baseball players generally have really strong grip strength, and obviously it matters, but to say it doesn't matter is ridiculous, right? And off base. So there's all of that you can get into and like go into the depths of like, oh well, the transverse wave when it hits the wall, when it hits the bat, by the time the wave goes down the bat and comes back to the ball, like the ball's already gone. And I'm giving you guys the spark notes of like the arguments of like, with all of that. But I'm going to talk about prior to contact, which I think is much more accepted and something that people just haven't thought about. Sequencing wise.
Yeah. Wait, and before you get to that, just like generally, like when you read a study, pay attention to the environment that was created. And look at that environment compared to the environment we're actually playing in. And take the study. Yes, is it valuable? Yes, is it some of the studies true to an extent? Yes, but also how controlled is our environment compared to a cannon that's shooting at the exact same spot that they know it's going to come at the exact same millimeter, to the racket. Like, okay, cool, valuable, but also like understand that's just not the environment we play.
We ask hitters all the time. I always go, hey, how often in a game are you perfectly on time? Like, how often in a game do you get that perfect A swing where everything's on time, right? And like, and even Tukes, brought that up in their podcast too. Is something like if you went through all your at bats and you went, for him, he always talks about like being on time twice. So it's like, okay, if you're on time like out of hand, and if you're also on time at contact, like how often is that going to be? It's going to be a very small amount of at bats, right? And that's the same thing. So it doesn't mean that hitters are not trying to be like they're trying to be. It's just really difficult to do. It's very difficult to hit a baseball flying through the air at a high rate of speed that could also break multiple different directions, and it's also really deceptive because the pitchers are trying to make it come into the same tunnel with all the things, right? Hitting, it's hard. Okay, it feels so damn easy. The best in the world wouldn't be so bad at it. Right? It's very hard. Okay, so again, along with that, if you look at the racket type thing, it's like when you're slightly off of center, which is almost every damn ball I hit, right? Slightly off. I don't, as much as we want to say, oh, bro, you perfectly squared that thing up. And compared to what? And compared to the most perfect ball he's ever hit in his life and that is possible of creating, no, he did not perfectly square that ball up.
Or his last at bat that he, squibbed to the second. Like, sure.
Yes. Right? And also, too, for example, it's like, oh, way to make an adjustment, all these things. Yes. But also, to get into this same mindset. Again, and Tuke said this on his podcast. We say it all the time. Same thing. Great hitters can hit when they're late, when they're early, when they're on time. They make it look like they're on time. Great shortstops, when they're fielding ground balls, they get there on time. They make it look like they're on time, but they're making all these little slight adjustments. They had to push a little bit harder. They had to do whatever they needed to do to get to the spot on time and make it look routine. So when a hitter makes it look routine, right? It doesn't mean, first off, that that it was perfect or all the things to our perception. And also too, this is the thing too. It's also comparatively too. You're looking at your 10-year-old and going like, man, he can't do 2 consistent swings in a row. And then you look at a big leaguer and he hits 2 jacks off a guy throwing 98, and you're just like, whoa, dude, 2 perfect swings in a row. And it's like, no. Remember the physics. He created enough force, hit it at the right angle, with a good enough collision efficiency, with good enough spin, and all those things, and it was good enough to leave the yard. It isn't the best ball that he could ever hit that was perfect in all the other scenarios. The best ball that they could ever hit that perfect, it probably will never happen in the game. Most likely it'll probably happen when they're training in front toss or something like that, where they have the best swing that they've ever taken in their life, right? And that's just not going to happen in game very much. Yeah,
and too, like, your 10-year-old's not creating enough force at the right time. Like, okay, he's 10.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay, right? And 2, he's 10.
He's supposed to be uncoordinated.
Yeah, he's figuring out how his body, works and is coordinated.
He grew 5 inches in the last 5 months. Like chill.
He's not going to be consistent. But back to your point too. Don't know exactly where you're going to go with it, but back to your point on the pre-contact. Being more accepted, and so segue back to that.
Yeah. So first off, we're gonna get a little deep, but we've been needing to get a podcast with this a little deep. So I'm gonna give you a different perspective. If you don't know anatomy or how the body biomechanics, right? Biomechanics and anatomy and kinesiology, kind of like this little mix of these things, right? So this is actually what happens in our body. So anytime we go to move a limb, period, any limb movement, and we can do this, we put sensors on the body and we can see muscle activation. Okay. If we go to move a limb right before we move the limb, our core stabilizes. The first thing that it happens, right? So before we can move a limb, the core has to stabilize so that when this right here, like when I'm swinging my arm in a circle motion, it's creating a perturbation, which is again like instability within the body, and it's creating all of these motions, right? Let's say if I swing my arm to the right, my body wants to go with that force. So the only way to counter that is I literally have to be creating a counter force like within my middle, right? To make sure my body doesn't rotate to the right, right? If I don't, every time I swing my arm to the right, like my whole body should go that direction, but I'm resisting, right? So we don't really think about that, but like before any limb movement, there has to be stability from the middle part of the body. That is the first activation that happens, is that the middle of the body stabilizes first before there is any type of limb movement period, right? Now, they call this pretension, right? And there's also pretension in other parts of your body. I'm just keeping it 101 of nerd stuff, right? So, okay. So there's already activation from the middle in the get-go. So it, again, is always middle out, right? Proximal to distal, right? Distal meaning far, proximal meaning in, towards the middle, like X, Y, and Z, close. Okay. And so everything always happens from the middle out, right? So activation happens from the middle of our body outward, right? Not outward in, right? Now, when we go to rotate, elite rotators, right? And this is kind of a scary thing to think about. Bring this back up again, is that elite rotators typically, yes, your best rotary athletes in the world, but also usually your most novice athletes in the world, because they don't have any preconceived understandings of how they think they need to move. No one's taught them all these other things, right? Little kids rotate from the middle part of their body. They don't spin their feet when they're going to hit. That's why everybody says squish the bug. That's why everybody tells them to turn their feet. That's why everybody tells them to do X, Y, and Z, because they don't rotate from their feet up, right? They rotate from their middle out, right? And then we teach them out of that, which is not good, right? Yeah. We've talked about that in length. Go take the Hitting Essentials course. You can get into some of those things, see some of the graphics, see some demonstrations of what that looks like. We walk. A lot of people would think, oh, we walk with our legs. We walk. The first thing that actually is the middle of our body is contracting, right? Our obliques on each side of our body, our muscles are firing towards my right arm swings towards my left leg for a reason when I stride, and my left leg swings towards my right arm for a reason, on my right leg for a reason when I walk, because our core is counter rotating back and forth, right? Which is really what's propelling us through the motions. And then the limbs are just extensions of that force that I've created and initiated from the middle part of my body. Again, if you want to look into some nerd stuff and you want to get into, you want to get into some deep stuff of guys that have had their limbs cut off and they can still walk, and like spinal engine stuff and spinal engine theory and like all these things. It's probably basically way past the theory at this point. But in any case, like you can look into all these things that have, this is studies from, I mean, I think that study came out in like at least the 70s, if not 50s maybe. Okay. And some of that information, right? But I think, I want to say off the top of my head, I don't know if I'm right, fact check me, I think it might have been 78. I don't know why. For some reason, I have that in my head. But in any case, we know that to be true of like how we create activation and how we create movement and how, and again, for example, if we were suspended in space, right? If you were to jump on a trampoline, jump in the air and you throw a ball, right? Your lower body's going to rotate the opposite way. If you're sitting on a chair and you throw a ball, right? A swivel chair, sorry. If you sit on a swivel chair and you throw a ball or a med ball or whatever, right? Your lower body is it's going to rotate, counter rotate the opposite direction, right? And that's because we initiate rotation from the middle part of our bodies. And then our limbs are just extensions of that. And so when we look at like ground force, that confuse people for a really long time because they're trying to do it with they're trying to drive their legs into the ground. They're trying to do all these other things when, again, it's all initiated from our middle. So, all right. So I laid that as a foundation of, okay, why would bracing be really important? Well, first off, like we talked about, like that rubber band analogy, if I'm holding one side of the rubber band, you're holding the other side of the rubber band, and I want to transfer energy, right? The more tight I get it, like, again, the easier I'm going to be, the less effort I have to put in the initiation to be able to transfer that energy from segment to segment. We got to remember that our body is not a lot of times when you see a lot of these graphics, there's like a famous, what do you call it? Like discus throw, where they have this like metal figure that like spins around, and then like it starts a chain event of like stopping, like bing, 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 and then all of a sudden there's like this throw. The problem that when we look at these like metal figures or X, Y, and Z are remodeling the body, and this is how God's beautiful creation of what our bodies are able to do. Our bodies are not just designed to create as much force as possible, right? They're designed to do a lot of things. They're designed to do yoga. They're designed to be able to fall and get back up and, be able to skateboard, or, they're designed to do a lot of things, right? And so when we have to train it, if we want it to specifically do, it's like a template, right? Like we have a template, we have structure. Some body types are better at doing certain tasks, right? Like, if you want to be a sumo wrestler, there's a certain type of structure. If you want to be a jockey, there is a certain type of structure. If you want to be a basketball player, there's a certain structure that's going to really help you out comparatively to other things, right? And baseball, you can be a lot of different sizes and a lot of different things, but also too, and there's a lot of different ways to compete at the sport and do so. But again, even there, right, there's things that really benefit you genetically that would really help you within that sport, right? The reason I say this is the body is not a metal, like solid structure, right? It is human tissue, right? It is tissue. And if you think about that, like tissue, you want to think about like, get your head in that mind space. When you're eating chicken, when you're eating
chicken.
The
chicken.
Yeah. When you're eating chicken, that is what tissue of your body is like. And it's not, some is a little bit more rigid, tough, right? And some of it is not. It's more tender, right? It's more, maybe there's a lot of fat, right? There's a lot of these other things. That is what your body tissue is like. That's what the muscles in your body are like. All those things. You got to remember, right? Energy is being transferred through that tissue, right? So if you could think about it, right, the better I can pull, if I grab that piece of chicken and I put it at tension, right, I can transfer energy. It's just like another object. It doesn't, the body's unique because the tissue becomes what we're asking it to become. Right? If it becomes, it needs to be loose and more fluid, and it doesn't mean transfer of energy fluid. I'm talking about like, for example, if it needs to be more, not elastic, like plasticity, like the ability to stretch, like a plastic bag. If you were to grab plastic and stretch it across, right? Like our tissue has the ability to do that, right? It also has the ability, again, but also if you pull it too far, right? You take that piece of chicken, you pull it too far, it ends up tearing apart, right? All of those things, and just knowing that, from the get-go, that our body adapts to the activities that we do or don't do, right? every single day throughout our life. You got something to say before?
Yeah, just a visual is actually a professor back in college. We were talking about fascia and was talking about it like a visual for people to, especially listeners, is like a piece of gum, like a warm environment, right? And we were talking about like muscles initially, and then it led to fascia, but the environment around it creates, you know, the gum to want to be able to like stretch and be a little bit more like elastic. But then when it's cold and you try to bend that gum, it snaps. Right. And but it's just adapting to the environment or like the task that you know is being asked for it to do. Right. And then it becomes that. But just a visual for people, I think, you know, it's pretty easy visual to get. It's like, oh yeah, you know, piece of gum when it's cold, it can break. But you know, also too, when it's in a hot car, like gets stuck to everything. It's like really like, you know,
gooey,
spread out.
Yeah. And all those things. Right. And another thing I read the other day is thinking about that is like how much water we have in our body. So fascia primarily is water, right? It's collagen, you know, collagen and water primarily, right? You can get collagen from like bone broths and things like that. Also, if you want to get an idea of like what fascia generally would like kind of look like, again, if we go back to the chicken analogy, you have like that white film that kind of is like over the chicken that some people like will tear off before they like, that's connective tissue, right? Like that's fascia. Like, and now along with that, right? We can train that. You can make it thicker, right? It could be thinner, and it depends on the activities that they're doing. It's certain. Also, too, there's gonna be lines of tension within it, just like muscles that have like striations inside the muscle, so that you can see which way that the muscle is generally stretched and contracts. All of those things are super important. But again, along with it, it's all trainable. You know, again, along with it is. We're connected from our toes to our fingertips with this connective tissue, right? Where, again, for example, if I were to stand you up and you were to balance on your left leg and like go like starfish in the air and just balance on your left leg, if I push on one side of your body, you're going to feel it all the way in your opposing hand, right? Because again, you're going to feel that tension, and that whole system is what do you call it? Dissipating that force that is being created, right? Or stabilizing that force that's been created. So that being super important there. But along with that, when we're going to transfer energy, especially in the scenario where, let's say if you take a little kid, right? They do a pretty poor job of bracing. Like they have a really hard time creating force, and they also have a really hard time transferring force. They're not good at either, right? They are pretty good, but also too, they are pretty good at falling. Little kids fall all the time, bounce right back up, right? Nikki P falls all the time, bounce right back up, right? Your Gumby type movers, right, have a really good job of like their Gumby, right? Like they're able to take these falls, do these other things. When you're youthful, you have a lot more water in your system, right? Like with age, you're typically your tissue gets more dehydrated,
and dry out.
Right? And dries out. Well, that's really problematic for fascia, right? Because it's so much, it needs so much water. So as these people like start to age, and then also too, let's say your habits, you don't drink a lot of water, or you drink a lot of things that dehydrate you. As you get older, it becomes way more problematic than when you're younger, right? And so that's another thing is, so as these kids get older, like men, for example, let's go with just men to women. If you just strictly say that, if you go men to women, like our muscle, like just from a physiology standpoint, is one, it builds quicker. We have we have testosterone to crazy high levels comparatively to women, all those other things as well. But also on top of that as well, then when we go and train and we do these other things, the reasons that we're so tight and men are generally not as flexible as women is not just based off of purely structure when it comes to like bones, right? But also when it comes into how our tissue is actually develops and over time. Like the reason that we're not flexible is also the reason that we're so strong. They go hand in hand, right? It's like the reason that rubber band is so under tension and it's holding like, you know, whatever the side of the, you know, whatever. I don't know. I'm just thinking about something like it's a tie down in a truck, right? Like the tighter you get that thing, right? It's holding the whole thing down or whatever, right? But also at the same time, it's not very flexible, right? And so there's good tension and there's bad tension, and people commonly talk about tension in the bad forms, right? Everybody's trying to go anti-tension, right? Flow and, I want it to look so effortless and all these other things. And I associate that with almost like lazy movements that are just like, as long as it flows, that means, okay, just because it looks flowy and watery and all that doesn't mean that it has a lot of power.
Yeah.
Right. It, again, also too, players that can create a high level of output with very little effort, right, have a large rate of force developments, right, where they're better athletes, like your shortstops. I need to like lunge into my leg to move left like you move left, right? Where you could just go, it looks like you're literally doing like a calf press and you're just like boop, boop, and you can just transfer energy so easy and pop to your left. But that's why you're a better defender. You have better feet to me, all these other things, right? It's because your body, you one, trained your body to do that. Two, body type is very different.
Yep.
All those other things, right? I'm also going to be more predisposed. Like I'm going to be way more likely to lift heavier than you when it comes to especially like deadlifts or squats or things like that, right? Just from a structure standpoint, how my body's built compared to how your body's built. So there's different things that you're going to be really good at, right? And this is why we have like first basemen and catchers and pitchers that like the different body types that are better for different positions, based off of that, right? But the reason we talked about that is like, okay, so now as kids get older and they start getting stronger and all these other things, well, one thing we can develop is, yes, you have the structure, which some guys are going to be more stable than others based off the structure alone. Genetically is going to really help them, but also, the nature versus nurture argument, right? Yes, genetics play a big role, right? But an even larger role that's in there. So let's say it's like 30% genetics. I'm making up some crazy number. 30% is significant. It's a big deal. Yeah. Right? It's most likely probably more like 20. But so 20% is still significant. Like, I mean, that's if someone owns 20% of your company, like that's pretty significant.
That's a chunk.
You get what I'm saying? You own 20% of Apple, boy, you're doing something. You know what I'm saying? So 20% is significant, right? But 80%, right? 70 to 80% is how we train. Right? So a lot of people want to blame it like, oh, well, he has that speed because, genetics. Oh, he does X, Y, and Z. Like, yes, genetics played a crucial part for sure. There's no denial there. But also, too, Usain Bolt isn't Usain Bolt because just his genetics. Yeah. Like, the guy, like, again, when he was like getting with that, it's like, I think his famous quote, too, was like, I think he said something like that. Like, I trained, what was his thing? Like, I trained like, he had some famous quotes like, I trained like 10 years for like 10 seconds. It's like, and what he meant by that is like, like his, I don't even know. I'm probably off on the numbers, but what he was saying was like, again, I had to do all that training, right? Now all these years, right? So that I could just run this sprint to be the fastest guy in the world, right? So it's not like he just woke up and was like, oh yeah, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to be the fastest guy in the world. Right. Because there's other people in the space too, that also, you're not that genetically gifted. There's a lot of other people in the world that are also that genetically gifted or even more genetically gifted. Right. And so like, and then you also had injuries. You also got, how their upbringing, you also got mindset, you also got all these other things that play into performance. Right. So when people want to paint it all as like, oh, it's just genetics or it's just this, then, like you're off base too. But as we get stronger, as all those other things start to happen, okay, then we get into the space of like, let's say we bring up the steroid argument. Steroids are not like that. A big thing that has to do with my power output is also my absolute strength. My absolute strength, and the reason that, if you never heard that term before, right? There's different sides of a spectrum when we're training athletes. When you get into the S&C side of things, right? Like for some guys, absolute strength, right, would be, again, how much can you deadlift? Do I want to maximize that? In this sport, is absolute strength the most important? Is my job, am I doing the strongest man in the world contest, right? How many times do I actually have to be able to produce that much, like pick up those many things? Like maybe I only need to do it 5 times. Well, that's the sport that I'm playing. Maybe I need to pull the semi 20 feet, right? Okay. Or are you a cyclist? And stamina and, muscle stamina and cardiovascular and all these other things. Like, okay, that's going to play a bigger piece. And like those athletes are going to lean more that way. Right. Like again, we go back to like Usain Bolt or something like that, right? Like he's not built and he hasn't trained himself to run long distance. Like, and also your consideration of what long distance is. But like, let's say, for example, he's not going to run a marathon. No. That's not he's not, and if he did run a marathon, he's most likely not going to be the fastest guy in the marathon. You know who's going to be the fastest guy in the marathon? The guy that trained to be the fastest guy in the marathon.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where that becomes very different too. And then you also, on the other side of it, it might be power. Now, how is power different than absolute strength? Well, just because I'm really strong doesn't mean I can do it really fast.
Yeah.
Right. And just because I can do something really fast doesn't mean that I'm very powerful either. Right. And because that's a different equation, right? Because power output is how much force can I create in a small amount or a certain a change in time.
Yeah.
Right. And so if that is the thing, it's like, okay, you might be fast, but can't create a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, and that's a very different thing. You might have really fast hands, for example, right? But it doesn't mean when you hit the guy that you're going to sleep him.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, some guys are like Mike Tyson, where they're fast,
and
they're strong, they're powerful. They got, the muscle endurance. Like, they got all these things that some sports require a lot of these things, and it's really hard, right? That's what makes it so difficult, is you got to have all these other areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that's also the big thing. So now getting back into, back into the body in that same way, it's like, okay, hey, like, the more I'm able, remember we talked about that foundational thing. If I want to move a limb, my middle's got to stabilize. Well, how fast can I move my limb is going to be based on how hard I can stabilize.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's going to be a massive piece, right? And on the other note of that, when we get into the biomechanics of how my upper body is actually rotating, just like when I'm sitting in the chair, as I go to rotate, the chair rotates the opposite direction. Well, what happens is when I'm actually on the ground, and I'm sitting on the ground doesn't rotate. So when the ground doesn't rotate and I put that force into the ground, my upper body rotates the opposite direction. I actually pushing against the ground, and my body rotates to the left, even though my lower body, if it was sitting in a chair, it would rotate to the right, which is why farm boards slide that direction. Right. Or why the Max goes that way and all those other things, as I go to rotate my upper body into there in sequence. And the problem is if I go to do that, and my middle and my ability to brace, the middle is the most crucial part for sure, but also too, when we come into stability, I mean, you need stability throughout your whole system, not just your middle, but it's the beginning, it's the start of everything. It's the crucial, crucifix, right, of the movement, right? Mm-hmm. And so if I can't create that stability, and also too, as I go into the strike where I need all of that power right now, right, where we can go off into a whole bunch of different things in that way and get deep, but and the sequencing of all of it is also super important, the coordination piece, and also, again, how much power can my core create, and that doesn't mean how hard can it necessarily rotate, which is a higher level progression of it, but we're talking about just your ability literally to create stability, right, in the middle part of your body, especially because what one of the most important things it is to your brain is, like, my brain's always trying to make sure that I'm protected, right? So it's always trying to make sure there's safety, right? And I'm always trying to be, what do I always say? It always
wants to protect itself.
Yeah, there you go, the other P. Yeah, it always wants to protect itself before it's trying to perform, right? So you know what it's trying to protect more than anything? I don't know, like your spine, right? The thing that connects to your brain, the thing that has all the nerves that fire out of your spine. It comes down your spine and they all come out. All the nerves come out like that, and they wrap around into your body. Guess what? If you have I have an injury. I broke my back. It's spinal, right? Like if you have a spine injury, it's messing everything.
Yeah, it's serious.
Everything's messed up, right? So your body, and again, like, it's a good way to die, right? Like, again, if you there's certain things, like, again, like you break somebody's neck or something like that, like that's a way to kill somebody, right? Your spine being stable is crucial. This is the thing. It's so crucial that God came up with a multitude of ways to stabilize your spine, and with multiple systems all working together in their own way to make sure that your spine is stable. Right. And we can train that to be, because again, if we're going to create high levels, the more force we're going to be able to create, the more stability we're going to need. So the elite athletes, they need way more stability than John sitting at his cubicle. Yeah. It's not even close. Right. But I think that was like the epitome there is like, okay, now how does this tie back into, well, how do we train that? Right. How do we train the sequencing, the firing patterns, and all these other things? Well, yeah, we could say things like some guy replied to me the other day, and he's like, man, I think he might have used the word like word salad or something like that. Or maybe he said that.
That's a good one.
Yeah, or maybe he said that something. Actually, I think this guy was the one that said that it was like a whole bunch of horse shit that I said or something like that. But in any case, he was like, all is this to say like contact quality and all these other things, and it's like, yeah. But the reason that it sounds like semantics, like to go and know all of these other things. But when you understand it to a deeper level, you understand who to apply it to, how you don't go down the drive line route where you just go, oh, we'll just swing harder. Like we talked about, like, okay, well, you're not hitting the ball to the back net. Well, if you get into the mindset, well, I just got to swing harder. 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 Well, if I just swung harder, it's like, bro, you were literally clipping. Like you didn't miss it by a fourth of an inch. Like you missed it by a full inch. Like you're clipping the bottom of the ball, the inside the ball, the outside the ball, and all these other things. Like you're literally not even creating the direction to be able to hit a ball hard that way. Your barrel isn't even moving in that angle. And then you keep telling yourself, I got to swing harder. 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 Like, and you go down that route is like, that's why you need to understand what is actually happening. And yes, as much as you would like, I was almost tweeted this the other day, is we got to be very careful. We got to be very careful of wanting our problems to be simple instead of evolving. I don't want to change. I want my problems to change.
Yeah.
Ayo. Like, no, bro.
It's like the easy fix
mindset. Like, there's nothing wrong with me. There's something wrong with it. Right? When you got to remember, like, no. There's some problems that are pretty complex. Yeah. And also, too, that's why there's specialists. And there's, for example, if you have some crazy disease that 1 in a billion people have, and there is disease out there that are like that, you want the specialist. That's what he does for a living, is he understands the intricacies of what is going on with what's going on with you. Now, if you go see someone that's general, right? They might be, oh, you know what? You need to exercise. You need to eat your food. You need to get to sleep. You got to make sure to do things. And it's not that those things wouldn't help your immune system and X, Y, and Z, all these. Great, right? But if your life was on the line, who are you trusting, right? And that's where when we come into this equation here, right, is I understand. To your normal like 12-year-old or whoever and again, if you just generally like to play baseball for fun and it just interests you and like it's something blah, 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 great. You most likely probably don't need us, right? Maybe you take bits and pieces, you listen to our social media, all these other things, great. But you want to be the best in the world? You want to compete against the top 1%, the top 3%, the top 5% of all of baseball? And guess what? You can't do it when you're 84, 65, 43, like you can do in golf, right? Like you can do in some of these other sports. This isn't chess. You have a very limited window. If you're not past AA as a position player, we'll make the clarification. If you're not past AA by 24, good chance you're probably getting cut the next year if you're not. And also, too, again, statistically, it was already hard to get drafted. At that point, you're on such a you're like good. You're a 0.5% of a 0.5% of a 0.5% at that point that actually maybe might make it. Is that route is very unlikely. Now, that's where you come in with specialists. Like if my life is on the line, my career is on the line, the life of my career is on the line. Now all of a sudden I want word salad boy and all the semantics all of a sudden become really important. Right? And the people that are in those spaces, it's like, yeah. Instead of you going, well, yeah, just contact quality and like you just want it to be that simple. Like, I'm sorry, dude. Like, you do need to know. You should read an anatomy book.
Mm-hmm.
Like education isn't the devil, right? Like, oh well, you should read about biomechanics. Yeah, you should ask more questions.
Yeah.
And not try to defend the hill that you decided to plant your seed in and go, I'm going to defend this for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than going, there'll be more to learn for the rest of my life. I'm not defending what I currently think.
Yeah.
I'm always willing to open and go the opposite way.
Yeah, and then to your point with that, like I'll use my personal experience. Like when I broke my finger and I had that problem. When I broke my finger and I had to go, I had to find a specialist. We basically went to a hand and finger doctor. But the particular surgery that I needed was a surgery that only one other doctor in the country has done, blah, 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 blah. But the reason I bring this up
Who was the other person that did it too? Didn't the other person have it?
Trey Turner.
Oh, that's right. That's what I was saying. That's a pretty cool fact.
That's my brother.
Yeah. We brothers, bro.
But yeah, that year that he broke his finger, supposedly like that doctor that created the surgery I had did a similar surgery, if not the same, on him. So
got it.
Kind of cool story.
Yeah,
but
pretty cool.
But anyways, yeah, he turned out a little bit better. But but
you know what it probably was?
In some ways.
You know what it probably was? They probably took part of your finger and put it in, and him or X, Y, and Z.
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean,
but the reason that connects though is that doctor that I had, he's a specialist, and so when I was going in, I'm getting prepped, right? Is he's given all these details, like he's given, and I can hear him. I haven't been put under, right? Getting all these details, like, hey, we're gonna go in, we're gonna cut here on the hand. We're gonna do a hemihamate. We're gonna laser graph it. We're gonna cut some part of his hamate bone off, right? Then we're gonna open up his finger. We're gonna open up with this type of incision. It's like he's going boom, 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 like all these details, and like in my head, I'm like,
word
what?
salad.
Yeah, word salad, right? But then he looks at me and he goes, we're going to take this, we're going to fuse it in your finger, you're going to get range of motion back. Yeah. And I'm like, all right, let's do it, dog. Let's do it.
Sounds good to me.
But if he were to just come in and I didn't understand that he was a specialist and I didn't have the pre-visit and I didn't listen to his expertise of like, hey, this is your options, this is why I recommend this, this is where this could go wrong, this is why, blah, 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 blah. And then like, if he didn't understand how complex it was, he was so good at understanding the complexities and then simplifying it to me who doesn't understand it and communicating like, this is why I recommend going this route for you. Here we go, right? And then presented it. And then the way I think about it too is like a conversation on a completely different scale, obviously, but with a hitter is like, we talk about this was having hitters that have been here for a while try to explain stuff to hitters that are newer here and like see where their head's at and see how well they know it and where the gaps in their thought process are, and then where the gaps aren't, where they're really in a good spot mentally. And it was funny, I was having one of our guys explain what a good position to swing from, a stretch position. Basically this kid's a little bit newer to really any training. He's just played like rec ball, and when I said get to your launch position or get to a position to swing from, he didn't understand necessarily what that meant. Like he was like, okay, like I'm not striding anymore, but he didn't understand what all that entailed. And then Gavin, the kid, he's like, yeah, so you want to get into a hinge and you want to do this and you want to do that. And he starts going, and but then too, I'm listening to him and I'm like, I could see how he was explaining it go whoop, right over his head. But then, from my perspective, I can see it's like, well, he's talking about a hinge and he's talking about creating space and like how that's so important and how creating stretch and getting tension is so important. So when he fires, he can get the barrel connected. And then also too, when he does that, like firing into his front side, so he maintains space and maintains direction and holding posture and a side bend. And like, Gavin's talking about this because he's like, but this is the first time I've challenged him to explain it. And he's learning, the intricacies of it all too. Yeah. But then to the kid is what connected the dots to him was like, hey, if you get here, you're going to be quicker to the ball. And he's like, oh, I'm all in. But where that connected me was like, you have to understand all the intricacies and like, okay, you're creating space, like you're creating, you're getting into some posture and you're getting connected or you're trying to get connected and, you're getting braced at contact, all these different things. So you can be quicker to the ball. Sure. If that's what connects with you, but all of those things that we had to present and then, I knew to then better communicate, it helps you get quicker to the ball, right? It's like when you don't do these things, like your barrel slow, it's dragging. And like that's what connected, right? But again, if I didn't go through all of those and understand that process myself, then I may not have connected with this hitter ever, or as quick, or when I connected with them, or even challenged another hitter to do it, right? And like same thing with that doctor. Like if he didn't understand the intricacies and he would have just came in and be like, hey, just trust me, bro, I'd have been like, I don't know if I want you to do this like crazy surgery that, you know, the doctor before said there's, you know, only been one other surgery done on my finger like this. Like, you know, again, it was important to lay that foundation, that word salad, right? To understand like, yeah, it may be a simple thought for you to achieve these complex things, but it is a little bit more complex than just, hey, see ball, hit ball, or hey, contact quality, bro. But yeah, so just my 2 cents on all that too is like the importance of understanding. But
and if you don't understand, the other thing is if you don't understand the complexities too, or how much something is serving you, like for example, think about the intricacies and what athletes will do to understand why they need to be hydrated. For example, there is study after study after study after study after. We can go on and on and on and on and on about how important water is, you know, to athletes, right? Just humans, period, but you know, even more to athletes, right? And the simple concept is, yes, drink more water, and also too, but then you start getting into it. Well, a layer deeper. Well, how much water? Well, when? Well, you know, is a certain temperature better when I'm trying to absorb it in certain ways? Should I add something to the water? Oh, also electrolytes are important. Oh, also on top of that as well, like if you drink water that also has some salt in it, it's going to cause these effects. Okay, well, also too, if you drink what's the type of water that Jarrell loves all the time?
Jarrell?
Yeah, what's his little water? What'd you like, Jarrell?
Spring water?
What water is your little water that you spend all your extra money on? Yeah.
Yeah. Is it spring water?
Okay.
Yeah. He got all the minerals and stuff in
and
it,
all the
so he
minerals and all
retains
these
it
things.
better.
Like it's not just. It sounds good to just be like water, right? But there is a lot of details of it. Also, too, if you drink tap water compared to you drink spring water, those are very different waters, right? But again, to the everyday person, they wouldn't know that, right? Like, and again, you actually get more hydrated when you drink spring water because of all the minerals and all the things that it actually helps you absorb the water better. All the, there's all of these things, right? There's documentaries on just water, right? And so like, this is where it gets to the same thing too. It's like, or we could say, yeah, man, contact quality. And then you guess what? You know what that thought process has done? You guys have done one round of flips. You did heavy balls. He hit it. Then he went into normal flipping balls because you guys don't understand the importance of why hitting heavy balls and what it can do for you over a period of time, right? If you do it in this way. And that's why there is extra details. And that's why we do have to do a podcast and open up the bigger subjects. And that's why long form is really important. And yes, it also is really hard to go over a lot of information in a minute and 30 seconds. Right? Yeah. And as much as you would love for it to learn everything you need to learn in a minute and 30 seconds, right? And then blame teachers again, I hear that all the time. It's like, well, if you can't explain it, like the thing, if you can't explain it simple, then you don't know well enough. I think it's an Einstein quote, right? But also too, again, the same thing. I would love for you to think that you know about I would love for you to listen to Einstein talk about the theory of relativity or something like that, right? And have him explain it in a minute and 30 seconds, and you think that you know it as well as Einstein, because that's ridiculous. Yeah. You don't know. He just gave you the general idea where you're like, again, I'm going to fuse your finger and do the thing and worry about finding it.
Makes sense.
But you can't go do the surgery.
Yeah.
Like, he can't teach it to you in a minute and 30 seconds. He can't also, like, you're going to have to learn. You're going to have to change things. And again, it's crazy with that is that coaches for so long, and this is like my like thing backwards as well with it, is I was the opposite of a nerd. When I was growing up, I was the opposite. I didn't like reading. I was doing math because they made me do math, right? I always thought science was kind of cool, but I also thought it was like kind of nerdy, right? Yeah. Like it wasn't like my thing. I learned everything that I have learned about hitting because I wasn't okay with certain hitters not getting better. Other coaches are fine with it. They got their 3 best guys and everybody's X, Y, and Z and X, Y. And, like, every hitter that comes and sees me needs to get better, and not just slightly better. I want to get them to the peak of what they could do, and it's not okay with me. It's not okay with me for my 7-hole to suck. It's not okay with me for my bench guys to suck. I don't care if a guy comes to us. Again, you see me do it. Like, I don't care if they're our worst hitter or they're our best hitter. If I see them moving, like I was telling Nicole that the other day, it's like, that's why I have a hard time working out when players are there, because I want to coach. If I'm in the room, I want to say something. I want to help them. I want to do X, Y, and Z. It's very hard for me to just go on the other side. Like, that was a hard thing for me, even learning as a coach, is when I was training other coaches, is to shut up. And, like, I had a hard time with that because it's like, I need to let you coach, right? And that's why a lot of times I was like, I got to get out of the room, right? Because, and then I'll listen from the other room or I'll do whatever, right? Is because that's a very hard thing for me there, because I'm wired to take the lead, right? To go and do the things, right? Like, it's natural for me. And so that was a very hard thing for me to do, is be in the room and not coach, right? And so I think that's the other thing, is like, I have a deep passion for getting players better, and not just slightly better. And then if they don't make it, oh, you have it or you don't. I don't believe in that. You didn't have it and now you do, right? Because that was my story. Like, that's God's story. There's all these people around me. There's player after player after player after player after player after player for hundreds and now thousands of players that I've worked with where they didn't have it and now they do. And so for you to be like, oh, you have it or you don't, it's like, again, that sounds like defeat to me. It sounds like that sounds like you're not a very good coach to me. Like, you know, like, that's what people that don't coach say. That's what people that don't teach say. That's what people like. That's what that sounds like to me. But, like, you know, that's how you feel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think too, it's like, for sure, sometimes you run into an athlete that is, you know, more athletic than another athlete. And it's like, well, he's just got it. It's like, well, maybe at the level that he's at now, it's easier for him to see results immediately because he's stronger or more athletic or whatever. But again, too, like, does that mean that the person next to him that's less athletic or not as strong can't ever be, you know, to that level of an athlete? Like, no. Right? And so, again, it's not like, oh, you just got it or you don't. Like, there's a lot that goes into that. And then, you know, from all sorts of sciences.
And to what, though, too, right? Okay, great. This guy might be genetically, all these other things, gifted, and these other, or maybe he's just further along in his development or whatever. Because of what if he's committed earlier in his life or did whatever. Okay, this guy might play in the pros. Doesn't mean that this guy can't play in Power 5. It doesn't mean that this guy can't play Division 1. It doesn't mean that this guy can't play at a high level NAIA. It doesn't mean that this guy can't play college. It doesn't mean that this guy can't make varsity. Some of the best work that we'll ever do and that I've ever done with athletes, no one knows about unless you were the athlete with me in the room and the parent.
Right.
Because it's usually the really unathletic 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 15-year-old, 17-year-old, right? That got cut from the squad, that is never going to make it to the Power 5, that is way too far behind, but he's developed so drastically, right? That, again, if you're in that circle and you're like, dude, like, I couldn't even make this team. That is my best coaching, right? And everybody wants to go and work with the big dogs, but your best coaching is built with your hitters that are not athletic, that are not all these other things, that are not your bench guys. Like Mike Easler told me a long time ago, I've told that you a couple times, is real hitting coaches is not told by their 1 through 6. It's your 7, 8, 9, and your bench guys. That's when you see how good a hitting coach is. Not can they work with the best dudes. Because you could tell Mookie Betts to hit upside down, that boy would probably still crush, right? Like, again, and now, is there a different level of intricacies of, like, can you actually get that guy better? Right. I'm just saying, like, Mookie Betts, you could say, hey, think right toenail, and he's probably going to hit a home run. And then you're going to be like, oh, it's my coaching. And, like, look how much better he's doing, X, Y, and Z. But, like, that's a different distinction. But what I'm talking about is, again, like, my best coaching, no one will even remember or have never even seen, because I did it when there wasn't no cameras, no post, no, you know what I'm saying? No glitz, no glamour. No, again, no one even, like, the same thing. No one's posting the kid on PG, talking about he's all state, all these other things. No. It's the kid that you have no idea about, that if I posted him, you'd think he still sucked. Meanwhile, he got cut from he didn't start playing until he was 14. He's now 16, right? He's now 16 and is probably going to go to a lower small college or whatever, right? But this kid literally started playing a couple of years ago, and if you post him, everybody's going to hammer him on social media and tell him how much he sucks and how terrible of a hitting coach you are. But that is the big difference of like who can coach and who cannot coach, right? When all the constraints, when everything's laid against you and every reason for that kid not to be able to be good. Now, so that when those kids come in, it almost like kind of fires me up. Like, I'm like, let's go. It's like the challenge is exciting, right? And on the top end, it's like that for me too. It's like such a big challenge for me. And it's just like, all right, big leagues here now, right? Like top of the top, like what can we do, right? That's also a different type of challenge, right? But again, like, and I think that's where it gets into the other thing is like, I was obsessed with getting guys better and like, I wanted in the hit and I wanted to, do all those other things. And like, and again, you know what the guys used to tell me when I was coming up? You either got it or you don't. Yeah. Right? Either you can hit or you don't hit.
Yeah. It was that it factor. It's like, oh,
if you just train more, if you just hit more, if you just blah, 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 if you just hit blah, blah, blah. And then it was all those other things, right? And then when I did all those things, they got to the other side, right? Either you got it or you don't. Yeah. Blah, 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 blah. It's just like, no. Yeah. Like, again, like I'll go to, have you ever heard me say that to an athlete? And I never will.
No.
Like, either you have it or you don't. That's such a
cop out. It's a cop out. Yeah, it's a cop out. And two, that doesn't mean that
you can't. Or my other. Sorry. Before we move on. Yeah. Or my other. You can't teach that. Shut the hell up. It's just that. No, you can't teach that. Yeah. You should say I can't teach that. That should be the new statement. I can't teach that because somebody can, and somebody's gonna figure out how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, no, you always
might need more. Either you don't have enough time. That statement means says I don't have enough time, or I don't know how to. That's what those two things. I get it, right? Some kids, like again, the guy's 28, never played baseball in his life, right? You're not going to get him to the big leagues.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Great.
Perspective.
That's different, right? But still, the first line of you can't teach that is inaccurate. It's not accurate.
Right. It's not accurate. Yeah, no, that's all I was going to go into is like, that doesn't mean that we're going to take someone that, like a Jarrell who's never played baseball and he's 30 years old and we're going to be like, yeah, we're going to make him a big leaguer. Like, no, most likely not. No. But
I can make him really good though.
Yeah, you can make him better.
I can make him a pretty good baseball player by the end of his life if that's what his goal was. Yeah, and that's what we were trying.
Yeah, when
to
you see where he started to where he finished. Yeah,
for sure. Right, and then we changed the training and we did all the things and blah 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 and we hit every day and we did. We went through it we can again on the same could I get him probably as good as a college baseball player within a relatively not too far off time frame Generally, would it take me what it takes most players 18 years? I don't think it would take me 18 years to get him there. No. Right? Because a lot of that is just physical development and a lot of those things. Yeah. And then obviously his body's gonna have to move different, right? But the same things with that, right? It's again, all of those lines are cop outs to me. If you're saying that and you're saying that about a certain player, that means when that thought pops in your head, that means that you should be reaching out to another coach to figure out what they would be doing with that athlete. Right? Because I have never looked at an athlete. I've never looked at a player. There's not a single player, a single hitter that I've ever looked at and been like, yeah, they can get better at nothing. And there's no way, I have no ideas of how I would get that player in some way. What we would try, a course of treatment, right? That we would try to get them, to help them with something specific, right? That they wanted to work on. Again, if that's your thought process or where your brain's at, I don't think you're a very good coach.
Yeah.
And it's not a good philosophy as a coach. If you have that thought in the back of your head that you could just go to that and go, well, if my drills don't work with him, well, he's just not that athletic.
Yeah.
Well, again, how many times those are the players that got me better. Those are the players that made me a way better coach is because I couldn't just do athleticism, or I couldn't just bank on their strength, and I couldn't just, if they don't have the players that got me the greatest as a coach, they weren't anywhere near very strong, they weren't that athletic, they weren't that smart, they weren't all these other things, and it's okay, all right, now it's going purely off of my leaning heavily on how good of a coach I am.
Yeah.
Now let's get better.
Yeah.
And then learn from that. And then when I get a really good athlete, then it's like we can make things pop and it can be quick, right? But like having that from the get-go and like having that with players and like coaches thinking that way, it's like foundationally, if you really want to help somebody, you going into it with a pessimistic thought process of, well, we can only do so much. So, like it's not a good thought.
Yeah.
Not a good philosophy.
And then too, just not about coaching, but it still applies to coaching. It's like, you'd always say this too. It's like right now you may not be able to direct a department at Apple, but like somebody can,
yes.
And like somebody can get that done, right? Yes. Maybe it's how you're trying to go about that process. Maybe it's your experience or lack of experience. Maybe it's just your skill sets and something completely different. Yeah, right.
Or whatever.
You know, it's like, again, it doesn't mean that it's not possible. It just means like, and then too, that's not like I can't perform surgery on my finger. Like, and I don't really have a desire to perform surgery on my finger. And that like, cool. Right.
Or I was going to say you remember when we said this too, was when we had the conversation about, one of our pro guys, when he was first doing the moves, right? They're like, oh, don't force it. Don't force it. Don't force it. Don't force it. And then all of a sudden he's doing it on TV with a live pitch coming, bam, hits a home run. And they're like, you can't teach that. And I'm like, oh my, it's like, boy, you have it both ways, right? Like, oh, you can't teach that. And then also too, don't force it. Yeah. Right. And then meanwhile, one created the other. Right. Right. And so I think it's just so interesting when you get in that spot, right? It's like when we see somebody great and they're so far removed, they put so much work in that in our brain, we can't even understand how expertise, how someone did this. Like, for example, there was a doctor at some point that looked at your finger and said, can't fix that.
Well, there was,
right?
2 of them.
Plenty of them, right? That are going to look at your finger and go, you're going to have to live with that the rest of your life, kid. Like, it just is what it is, right? And then there was a doctor that was like, how could we fix that? What could we do? What could we try? What could we do? X, Y, and Z, right? And then they came out with, or new technologies come, and then again, and that's how things are innovated and things are created. But I think it's so funny because that happens so much. I've seen guys put in a crazy amount of work over an extended period of time that was not reasonable to most humans. And then people go, oh, he's natural. He's just a natural. He's just a natural. People do that all the time with me. When the certain skill set or something I have, like talking in front of a mic or being on camera. Is there a genetic portion of that of from a young age, was I, certain things? Sure. Right. But also too, I was saying that I got a library at my house. Like I got a, you know what I'm saying? Like the amount of, I was just talking about a conference that I want to go to and things I want to go learn, and how I'm always talking to people and learning all these things. It's a crazy amount of effort over an extended period of time that other people are not willing to do. It's missed birthday parties. It's time away from my family, living across the country. I was gone for 10 years away from Vegas because other places had opportunities that Vegas didn't offer for me at the time for what I wanted to do. And so I lived other places, right? And again, along with it, it was never my plan to live back in Vegas again. That just happened. And again, because it offered me an opportunity that I didn't have in other places. So I ended up coming back. But I think the same thing is people, and then they want to go, oh, well, natural. What's natural? You know what's natural for anybody to do? You know what's natural is to do nothing.
Be lazy.
Be lazy and reserve your energy and it's not natural to be great. It's not natural to be good. It's natural to be average. That's what it's natural to be. So if you're above average, yes, genetics and all those things could push you above average. But when you realize, I was looking, I think Alex Hormozi said this the other day, where he's like, when you realize how big the gap is from good to great, whew, there's a lot of people that are good. Good to great. That's also a good book, by the way. I think Collins, wrote that. That's also, but when you realize how big that chasm is from good to great, you start realizing again, that's not filled with genetics. That's not filled with all these other things. That's filled with a compounded, crazy amount of work over a long, extended period of time, obsessed, whatever that driver is for you, right? And with naysayers, with people talking crap, with people doubting you, with people doing all that stuff, that's what that is. and going beyond all of those things to get to that other place, for that to be devalued and for people to go, that's why when people say that about athletes, when they're like, oh, he's just a natural, I'm like, bro, you don't know how much that guy works. You have no idea what that dude has to do so he could show up and sign your little autograph and then hit the ball, and then you want to go, well, if I wouldn't have broke my arm. It's like, come on, man.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's like, give credit where credit's due.
Yeah.
That's a biblical principle. Like, give credit where credit's due.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, baseball example is like, I can think of like Cano. Like, I bet Cano worked his butt off. But you know how many people are like, oh, he looks lazy. It looks so natural. It's like, it looks like he's not even trying. It's like, I bet he worked his butt off, from a young age up. Like, there's no way his path is just
they used
easy.
to defend him. Joe Torre used to defend him all the time because people would say that about him, and then he would be like, Cano works hard, like X, Y, and Z. Like, I know he makes things look easy and like how he like kind of goes about his business, but like he's always here. He shows up. Like, again, people also say that when you're like made it to the top two, and it's like it just like what it appears to be. But I think that's the same thing. Like we say that I say that all the time. It's like it takes a lot of effort to look effortless. Right? It takes a lot of years. Like, it's almost like a compliment when someone's like, "Oh, you're a natural." It's almost, you take it the other way. It's like, man, I make this look so easy, right? Like, I make it look so easy that even you think you could do it. Like, that's a crazy, when you're doing something so hard, and you make it look so easy that other people sitting on the couch think that they could do what you do. You're pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you're on a different level. Right? Where when you can make the NFL look easy, when you can make the MLB look easy, you're pretty damn good.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're pretty damn good.
Yeah. No, I mean, you could think of like just NFL starter back up, like elite quarterbacks. Like, there's sometimes you see like a throw and you're like, oh yeah, like
I could make that pass.
Yeah, it's like no,
you got four guys that are.
Oh boy, he got like 3 6'4" linebackers running at him at full speed at 340s, and
for sure
he's throwing over linebackers
for sure.
in between safeties on a dead sprint on the run sidearm
with 10 seconds on the clock. It's just like to go the full field.
It's like, oh god,
it's like, oh,
you did that in Madden. Chill.
Like,
you hit B.
You have a hard time doing that in Madden. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
B.
let's not forget. Like, if you were sitting in Madden right now and these were the circumstances, you'd be like, damn, I'm probably going to lose.
This is a tough situation. I got a big completion here.
And then when you go the other way and the people start expecting you to win, woo! They expect you to win World Series. They expect you to win Super Bowls. Or you get to like Bama, right? And it's like, they finally got dethroned.
Yeah, you lose a game to another. I mean, I guess their 11th top program in the history of college football, and they're like, "Oh, Bama's gone." It's like you lost to one of the top 3 football programs to ever exist in college football.
But I would say this though, even though that they're still at obviously an extreme high level, right? Extreme high level, they're not dominant wise where they were, right? And again, the game has changed.
Yeah,
NILs, transfer portals, all these other things.
They lost their
right?
whole roster to the NFL.
Yeah. all the things, right? But again, what I meant by that though is like to be good over an extended period of time, like they were, right? To have that dynasty type setups, right? Is you can't just have good players 1 year. Like you got to be, and then you got to hold them, and they can't go to them going to other schools and like being willing to like get them to buy in, and like when their time comes, and like because again they could go to LSU, they could go to all these other programs, but like
and another one that I don't think people think about is like, well, what if they go to the NFL and they all sucked?
Yeah.
Well, then people would be, well, my goal is to get to the NFL. Why would I go to Alabama to just be good in college when I want to go? Like, all those guys go to the NFL and they're like, all right, well, he's a quarterback here. Every running back went to Alabama as a top running. Oh wow, like the last 3 stud.
I was gonna say,
it's like,
I was gonna say also too. Again, now we're getting into college football, but also too, like if you just looked at the size difference back then too, like with Bama looked like an NFL team. You know what I'm saying? Now it's obviously much more spread. People will also catch up, right? Like that's the hard thing. It's really hard to be good for an extended period of time because everybody they start trying to hire all your coaches, right? Like
they did.
They think, right? Like half the coaches that Saban plays against and loses against at times is his coaches.
Yeah, like homeboy at Georgia. Like he coached under him.
Yeah,
like 100%. you got,
or they're in the NFL, or they, X, Y, and Z. And again, like he was underneath the coaching tree too, right? Like who was his like main guy? I don't remember. You remember Durrell?
Saban's like mentor, head guy.
Mentor? Oh, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Billy.
Yeah, Billy. Yeah, Belichick. So like it's the same thing, right? The coaching tree, right? Like,
Who'da thought?
yeah, who would have thought, right? And then the branches off there. But I think that's like, like again, the same thing. It's just really hard. And again, when that stuff gets dialed in to like, we over here started with heavy ball. Somehow we're on college football. But no, I think the
Can't
same
run
thing,
from it.
right? It's just. It's that time of year, baby. We got snips for everything.
Heck, Tank's
Got
built
sniff for
like
everything.
football, so
All right.
But-
Well, I think that's a pretty nasty one. Ready to
Yeah,
pray us
no,
out?
let's wrap it up.
All right. I'll pray us out, and then we could get it rocking. Tanky, get your prayer pause ready. All right. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time we spent with you. And just in the community, God, and just the ways that we can share, and then just wrap our heads around the knowledge that you offer and all the different areas that we continue to grow, and then the expansive world that you have for us, God, that there is never a destination. There's never a place where we can arrive. There's always a deeper depth, a higher ceiling, a wider width that we can reach to, God. And we're just so grateful for your abundance, and that we can always look forward to what is next and what is coming in the future. And we ask all these things in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. 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 Well, until next time, Farm System out.